So the budget has finally been released, and there's been plenty of discussion. Let's cut through all that chatter and find out what's really included in Carney's first round. I'm Steve Sandford, you're watching Dominion Report. I've broken this video down into three components. So first we're going to go over what's in the budget, then we're going to cover what's controversial in the budget, and we're going to actually talk also about what's not in the budget and maybe explore a little bit about why. So the budget was announced, and it was announced later in the year than normal, which is unusual but understandable given the timing of the new prime minister's election to office. Now, of course, that didn't stop the opposition from taking the government to task for a late budget, and frankly, I would have done the same thing if I were them. So it was announced and it was discussed in Parliament, and it did ultimately pass. And the way that it passed was pretty dramatic and actually rather entertaining. I have a video which covers that, how it all went down. I'll put the link below. Okay, so budget 2025, let's get into it. Starting with the first section here, which is what's actually in this budget. So there's a pretty major investment in infrastructure, and all of this comes from chapter 1.1 of the budget called Accelerating Major Nation Building Projects. Now, Carney has called this a nation building budget, which is, either code for massive investment in future GDP growth activities, or it's code for a gigantic deficit. I'll let you decide which you think it is. And just by the way, it doesn't have to be either. It could be both. As a part of all that, the Build Communities Stronger Fund puts $51 billion over 10 years towards roads, public transit, hospitals, water utilities, all the things that government's supposed to do, but now with more money. Next in the budget is Chapter 1.2, and this is called Supercharging Growth, which includes a section called Productivity Super Deduction. This is essentially a write-off program that encourages growth in manufacturing and business equipment. Write-offs are available for green energy equipment, R&D assets, and certain types of industrial buildings. The whole point is to boost industry in Canada. Okay, moving on to Chapter 2.1, this is Protecting Canada's Strategic Industries. Now, in this section, there are significant measures to harden domestic supply chains, to tighten investment screening, and to ensure foreign state-owned enterprises cannot acquire Canadian strategic assets. Also, as part of the same chapter, tax incentives for mining rare earth minerals. Now, these minerals include antimony, indium, gallium, and scandium, probably others as well. These minerals are required for new technology, things like semiconductors, batteries, solar cells, LEDs, 5G, telecom equipment, and space industry equipment, plus also just for the production of various alloys. These are all things that the world needs, and not everybody has those minerals buried in their backyard like we do. So there's a section on support for transition to clean energy tech, and this is Chapter 1.3. It's Canada's Climate Competitiveness Strategy. Now, this section is essentially what you would expect. I won't break it all down, but I just want to say one thing about this. Clean energy is quickly becoming close in price, sometimes on par, in fact, and sometimes even less expensive than fossil fuels. So this is not just about being environmentally responsible. This is about allowing Canadian businesses to transition to a more competitive footing. And plus, regarding those minerals that we were just discussing a few moments ago, we should be using them to manufacture the technology domestically rather than shipping raw materials to other countries who can build clean energy tech and then sell it back to us. All right, so there's a whole section on trade diversification. Chapter 2.2, Growing Canada's Trade with the World. Now, this section is critical. The United States is no longer a reliable partner, and the world order is undergoing a significant transformation. And there's a silver lining, if you will, in the way that Trump has, and the Trump administration has treated Canada. I feel like it's kind of given us a kick in the pants, perhaps the reminder that we needed, that it's time for us to diversify our trade. This part of the budget funds new trade corridor infrastructure, it funds Arctic transportation routes, and it promotes general export expansion. And I would argue that this is one of the primary issues that helped Carney win the election, so it's no surprise that it's a major budget section. Okay, Chapter 4.1. Now, this is a big one. This is this is called Defending Our Sovereignty, and it earmarks over $81 billion over 10 years for defense. Now, back when Carney made certain announcements to the EU and to NATO about defense funding, I made a video, and we talked about how we need to grow our defense budget, and I'll put the links to those videos below. Defense spending, of course, includes military aircraft, and I'm sure you've heard about the ongoing discussion over the American F-35s and the Swedish Saab Gripen aircrafts. I was actually considering whether this topic was worthy of a video, so let me know your thoughts in the comments. If I get enough positive ones, I'll do a video on that as well. Also included in defense spending are cyber security programs. Now, I think that this is super important, probably more than most people realize. And if you want proof of why it's important, just go watch my video on foreign influence in the Alberta separation movement. I'll add that one to the list of links below. Also part of defense spending is the Defense Industrial Strategy. Now, this aims to manufacture more of our own defense acquisitions here in Canada. And if those industries can be made competitive, we can also sell that equipment to other countries, to allies as well. And I think this is really important. And while it falls under the defense funding, there's a lot of overlap with the previously mentioned supercharging of domestic manufacturing. Okay, chapter 3.1 in the budget is supercharging home building across Canada. There's a lot of supercharging here. At any rate, part of this section is Carney's signature component, which is called Build Canada Homes Program. And this has been much discussed by the government. The primary goal of this is to boost purpose-built rental housing, and the strategy is tied directly to broader infrastructure and economic growth, while not only being tied to housing affordability. So that kind of highlights the budget. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but those are the items that stuck out to me. And it kind of wraps up the first component of this video. But we're going to jump straight into what in the budget is controversial. And so first and foremost, on the controversy side, is the size of the deficit. In this budget, it's $64 billion. And that is the largest non-pandemic deficit in Canadian history. $64 billion represents about $1,600 for every single Canadian. Now, I understand the world is changing, and we need to invest in Canada to be prepared. And if this all works, Canada could be well positioned to lead the world into whatever the new normal is. But if it doesn't work, oh boy, it's going to be expensive. Also controversial in this budget, the military spending. It's kind of vague. There's not a lot of specifics there, and maybe that will come in future budgets, but it's just not there right now. And it's difficult to say how much of the military budget spend is new relative to what was previously committed. And plus, there's no apparent path to the 5% of GDP by 2035 that Carney promised NATO and the EU. And I think the biggest controversy of this budget is just the overall risk. I can see that, we need to address the international world order. It's not going to be what it has been for the last 80 years. And so this concept of nation building and generational investment, as Carney calls it, it does make sense. But how do we know it's going to work? There's all kinds of risks here. You could have labor shortages or provincial regulatory issues or supply chain bottlenecks and natural disasters, war. Any manner of things can interrupt the success of nation building, and all that assumes that the plan was properly planned out in the first place. Okay, so we've covered the highlights of the budget and we've talked about some of the controversies, but what is not in this budget? Let's start with social issues, because there's nothing new. There's no tax cuts, there's no increased benefits, there's no direct cost of living relief. All the financial incentives in this budget are geared toward businesses and industry. Now, we're all going to benefit if the result is growth in industry, but only a few people will benefit if the result is growth in industry profit. I would imagine the hope is that nation building efforts will make the country so rich that we can afford to reduce taxes and increase health and social benefits later. Because that's always worked out, right? Hashtag just saying. Also not included in the budget is a dedicated section to Indigenous issues. Now, existing programs and funding will generally mostly continue, and there are references to some specific issues scattered throughout the budget, but there's no major health, infrastructure, or education announcements specific to Indigenous issues at this time. Among other things, not directly in the budget, climate justice, cost of living initiatives, social housing. Each of these is indirectly addressed to some degree in various areas, scattered throughout the budget, but there's no specific section highlighting or addressing them directly. And there's one more to add. Build Canada Homes is a nice new name for what is effectively not that different to what the previous government was already doing. When Carney selected Gregor Robertson as his housing minister, I had some hopes. Robertson has experience with modular homes and has tremendous contacts with municipalities across the country. I really thought there'd be something else there. And I actually talked about Gregor Robertson in a video. I'll link to that one below as well. Why are all these items omitted from the budget? That's a good segue into a bit of a conversation about my overall feelings on the budget. Because, quite frankly, despite everything I've discussed, I am a little bit underwhelmed by this budget. After all the talk about decoupling from the United States, about generational and nation building investments, after all the talk about a new Canada that's ready for however the world evolves, I expected more flash. I expected more mega projects, and honestly, I expected a bigger deficit. I know, right? I'm not saying I want a bigger deficit. I'm just saying I expected one. Now, just today, on the day of filming this, there actually has been a pipeline announcement, and I don't know how the pipeline dollars fit into the dollars of this budget, but I think that's a clue towards some of the strategy that's going on here and what we can expect going forward. Now, side note here, I'm going to talk about the pipeline in an upcoming video because I actually have a sneaky theory about that, probably an unpopular opinion. You don't want to miss that one, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel. So after reviewing the budget and feeling underwhelmed, I've had a bit of time to think about it, and I had some time to talk to some really smart people I know, and here's where my thinking is right now. Carney needed the budget to pass, and I really do think he wanted to avoid a late year election. He probably would have won an election, and maybe even with a majority, but it would have been a big distraction from the agenda, and at best it would have been only a slim majority. And of course all of that's conjecture because we'll never actually know for sure. My feeling is that he just wanted it to pass. And my guess here is that he presented this budget as I cringe as I say this, as a modest budget. I mean, it's not modest at all, historically speaking, but perhaps it's modest compared to what Carney was talking about and thinking when he was speaking to us during the campaign and in the time since. So he passed this as a quote-unquote modest budget, and perhaps he's planning for some political wins in the coming months. That pipeline announcement, that's probably the first of many. All those other items that we talked about that weren't in this budget, those can be future announcements. And I said this in a recent video, but I'm going to repeat it. I'm guessing that late spring or early summer, Carney will have racked up a few more of those types of political wins, and then he'll call an election because his next budget won't be a modest one. And he's definitely going to need a majority to get that one passed.